The chill of the morning air seeped through my skin as I stepped onto the porch, the rough wood feeling familiar beneath my fingertips. I could hear the rustling of leaves nearby and the distant hum of life waking up, but my focus was drawn to the stack of HOA letters resting against the side table. They towered like a fortress, each envelope a reminder of responsibility looming over me. As I reached for them, a shiver ran down my spine. The papers felt crisp and cold, their edges sharp enough to cut through any pretense of calm. I had been avoiding these letters, each one a formal summons to engage in yet another round of community disputes that seemed endless. My breath caught slightly as I realized that today would not be like any other day. Kate's voice broke through my thoughts as she stepped out onto the porch with her coffee in hand. "Bob, have you looked at those yet?" There was an urgency in her tone that made me hesitate. She always had this way of cutting straight to the heart of things, unearthing what I preferred to bury under layers of procrastination. "I was just about to," I replied casually, though the knot in my stomach suggested otherwise. Each letter felt like a weight tied to my conscience, reminders of responsibilities neglected and neighbors waiting for resolution. Kate took a seat on the wicker chair opposite me, her brow furrowed with concern. "You know it's getting worse, right? We can't keep ignoring it." Her words hung between us like an uninvited guest. I nodded slowly, feeling the pressure build inside me. The HOA meetings had turned into battlegrounds, each member armed with grievances and accusations. It wasn't just about property lines anymore, it was personal now, tangled in pride and dignity. Just then, Evan appeared from around the corner. He was dressed for work, his tie slightly askew, a reflection of his perennial rush. "Dad, are we still on for lunch today?" "Of course I am," I said quickly, grateful for his presence as he brought a momentary reprieve from our mounting tensions. But even as I spoke, I sensed him picking up on something. The slight twitch at my jaw gave it away. "What's wrong?" he asked directly, his youthful curiosity piercing through my feigned nonchalance. I glanced at Kate before responding. There was no hiding anything now. "Just some letters from the HOA," I admitted reluctantly. His expression shifted to one of understanding mixed with frustration, a blend I'd seen too many times before when discussing neighborhood politics with him. "They're just letters. You don't have to let them get to you." "I know," I sighed deeply as I leaned back into my chair, hoping to find comfort in its worn embrace, but instead feeling confined by its structure, the very definition of being trapped within your own home. As if sensing our collective tension, Helen emerged from inside carrying her tablet, a modern-day oracle, ready to weigh in on whatever fate awaited us today. "Did someone say HOA?" she chimed cheerfully while scrolling through unread emails. The atmosphere shifted again. Helen had this way of lightening burdens without even trying. Her presence seemed to dissolve some of our concerns like sugar in warm tea, sweetening our day but not erasing its bitterness entirely. "Do you know what they want this time?" she asked innocently. "They're demanding compliance regarding fence regulations," Kate replied tersely, clearly annoyed by the absurdity of it all. Before Helen could respond further, Daniel strolled onto the porch with his usual bravado, eyes twinkling as if he carried all the answers we needed tucked away in his pocket. "You folks are making mountains out of molehills," he quipped lightly before plopping down next to Helen. His carefree attitude was infectious. However, it also echoed an unsettling truth. We were teetering between ignoring these issues or facing them head-on together as a community, or perhaps even better yet, family. I couldn't shake off the feeling that dealing with these HOA grievances would require more than just casual banter or dismissive remarks. It required standing firm for what mattered most, honor among neighbors who sometimes felt more like strangers. "Let's just get them sorted," I finally declared, after weighing everyone's expressions carefully. A part of me craved peace, while another longed for confrontation, a dance between diplomacy and indignation that often felt inevitable in these situations. Helen raised her eyebrows at me knowingly, while Evan leaned forward eagerly, as if urging me onward into battle against invisible foes lurking behind envelopes filled with bureaucratic jargon. With newfound determination coursing through me like caffeine from an overbrewed cup of coffee, I stood up and gathered all those HOA letters into my arms, no longer merely pieces of paper, but symbols representing every ounce of responsibility weighing down on me since moving here years ago. "All right then," I announced firmly, while fighting back any lingering reservations that threatened quiet resolve. For better or worse, I would face this head-on today at noon during our scheduled meeting with fellow residents, ready or not. The others exchanged glances filled with uncertainty, but also encouragement, an agreement forged silently among us, tethered by shared anxieties surrounding honor and accountability demanded by living close together under one roof, or four walls separated only by thin wood fences painted white. The door creaked open, and I felt the weight of the world shift ever so slightly. Helen stood there, her brow furrowed, looking like she had just stepped out of a storm. The tension in the room thickened. It felt like we were all holding our breaths. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. I could see her eyes darting between me and the stacks of legal files crowding my desk like a swarm of angry bees. They were buzzing with cases that needed resolution, each one stinging my conscience anew. "Just some last-minute preparations," I replied, trying to sound casual. But it was harder than forcing a square peg into a round hole. I felt exposed, like a tightrope walker teetering without a net. The truth was that I'd been wrestling with doubts about our latest case, the one that could change everything for our community. Helen stepped further into the room, her presence filling the space with a warmth that chased away some of the chill creeping through my veins. "You're not ready, are you?" She wasn't asking. It was more of an observation wrapped in concern. I rubbed my temples. I don't know if anyone can ever be ready for this. My hands felt clammy against the wood grain of the desk that had seen too many battles fought over justice and equality. Suddenly, she reached for one of the files, flipping it open as if she had discovered an old photograph hidden beneath layers of dust. "What about this one? This family deserves better." Her finger traced lines on the page like she was mapping out an escape route. Those words struck me hard, a bolt of clarity slicing through my foggy thoughts. I watched as determination ignited in her eyes. It was contagious. "You're right," I murmured, feeling the surge of purpose rise within me like tidal waves crashing after a long drought. She straightened up and took a deep breath. "Let's file an injunction today instead of waiting for next week's hearing." The decision radiated from her like sunlight breaking through clouds, illuminating possibilities I hadn't dared to consider. In an instant, the power dynamic shifted in the room. It was no longer just my burden to carry alone. We were in this together now. Helen leaned against my desk with renewed resolve, her unwavering spirit casting shadows on my fears. But then came the nagging thought, was this enough? There were layers upon layers to unravel before we could truly make an impact. The clock ticked ominously in the background as I glanced at Helen once more, sensing that we were only scratching the surface of what lay ahead. The phone rang unexpectedly, slicing through the quiet morning air. I felt my heart quicken, a sensation like stepping onto an escalator that suddenly jolts into motion. It was a call I hadn't been expecting, but I answered anyway. "Bob Hayes?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I shifted in my chair on the porch. The warmth of the sun filtered through the leaves overhead, casting dappled shadows on the ground. But there was an undercurrent of tension swirling in my gut, something between anticipation and dread. On the other end was Samuel, a colleague from the office. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "Bob,
we've got a situation with the HOA letters." My stomach turned. Those letters had been a hot topic lately, filled with accusations and threats against people who dared challenge our community's status quo. I leaned forward, gripping the armrest of my chair tightly. "What do you mean? What's happened?" There was a pause before he continued. "It looks like they're planning to enforce Section 4.2 against some families who can't afford to comply." My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just about property lines or fence colors anymore. This was about honor, our honor as civil rights advocates, and standing up for those who were powerless. "Sam, we can't let that happen," I stated firmly, feeling a surge of determination wash over me like adrenaline. It wasn't merely an abstract principle, it was personal. These families were friends and neighbors. "I know," he replied quietly, "but we need more evidence before we can take action." Just then, Helen appeared around the corner of the porch with her coffee cup clutched tightly in both hands. Her expression faltered when she noticed my unease. "What's going on?" she asked, concern knitting her brow together. I glanced at her, weighing how much to share. She'd always been supportive, but could be fiercely protective of our family's reputation, too. It would take courage to explain what lay ahead if we fought back against the HOA's decisions. "Sam just told me about some upcoming enforcement on those letters," I replied cautiously, gauging her reaction. "It's worse than we thought." Helen stepped closer, her body language shifting from casual to alert in an instant. "Are they targeting anyone specific?" "Families who can't afford it," I said through clenched teeth. Her eyes widened in understanding. She knew that meant those least able to defend themselves. In that moment, it hit me. This wasn't just another case for me as an attorney. It was a battle for honor and dignity within our community. I could see Helen processing it all, considering not only our role, but also how deeply this issue affected us personally. As if sensing a shift in our conversation's gravity, Helen nodded slowly and took a deep breath. "We have to act now," she declared decisively. I felt an unexpected relief wash over me at her words. She had made up her mind without hesitation. But alongside that relief came apprehension, a recognition of what taking immediate action could entail for us both, personally and professionally. "All right," I said cautiously, while mentally tallying every possible consequence that lay ahead, the backlash from neighbors, and perhaps even losing clients who disagreed with our stance. But watching Helen resolutely grasp her coffee cup tighter reaffirmed my resolve. Then came Sam's hesitant voice again from the phone. "Bob, are you still there?" "Yes," I replied quickly. Sensing urgency pushed me forward again, despite lingering doubts eating away at me inside, like vines pulling back toward darkness instead of light. "I think we should organize a meeting tonight, with everyone involved," Sam suggested tentatively. "Let's do it." My voice sounded stronger than I felt internally, as uncertainty clawed at me like vines pulling back toward darkness instead of light. After hanging up the call with Sam and placing my phone down beside me on the porch railing, I turned toward Helen once more, the sunlight catching glimmers off her hair as she remained steadfastly focused on me. "What now?" she asked softly after several moments passed between us where silence thrummed heavily around us like thick fog hanging low over water. "We prepare for tonight," I said firmly, with renewed purpose igniting within myself, the stakes higher than ever before, as if grappling with waves crashing against rocks rather than facing mere words tossed carelessly across tables during meetings. But somewhere deep down lingered doubt, whispering questions into my ear. Would anyone show up? What if they didn't agree? Could we really change minds? Those thoughts loomed heavy over us, even as hope flickered brightly somewhere beneath them. A lighthouse guiding ships homeward amidst chaos raging outside harbor walls, built high through prejudice, fueled through fear, lacking understanding altogether. I took one last look out toward the street before heading inside behind Helen, her presence grounding yet inspiring so many conflicting emotions stirring beneath skin taut with anxiety, dancing close upon edges, threatening to spill forth if left unchecked too long. Yet somehow reassuring too, despite uncertainty lurking just beyond sight, waiting patiently alongside shadows cast long across pavement, leading nowhere certain at all. I could feel the tension in the air, thick like a fog, that wrapped around us. The stack of case files on my desk loomed like a mountain I was supposed to climb, but the world outside felt more pressing right now. Helen stood there, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. "They're planning another protest," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I could see the anxiety flickering in her eyes. It was contagious. "Another one?" I replied, pushing back in my chair. "What happened to the last one?" She took a deep breath and looked straight at me, determination settling over her features. "It got violent, Bob. We can't afford to let that happen again." I leaned forward, intrigued but cautious. "And you think we can change things? You really believe we can make a difference?" "I know we can," she asserted, her resolve cutting through the doubt like a knife. "But we need to reach out to them, get ahead of it before it spirals." As Helen spoke, I felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on my shoulders. The power dynamic shifted. Her passion ignited something within me that had grown dim over years of battles fought and lost. Yet even as hope flickered, I wondered what would happen if our voices failed to resonate this time. What if we were too late?
The morning sun hung high, casting a warm glow over the porch. I could feel its heat against my skin, but it didn't bring any comfort. Instead, it felt like a spotlight, illuminating the growing rift between me and my son, Daniel. "Dad, you really think that's how it happened?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the gentle hum of the neighborhood as he leaned against the railing. I could see his hands gripping the wood too tightly, knuckles white. I nodded slowly, letting his disbelief wash over me like a wave crashing against the rocks. "I know what I saw, Daniel." My voice was steady, but inside I felt a storm brewing. The truth seemed so simple to me, yet he stood there with doubt etched across his face. Daniel pushed off the railing, pacing back and forth. The floorboards creaked beneath his weight as if they were echoing our tension. "You say they're hiding something in those HOA letters, but what proof do you have? It sounds crazy." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Just then, my daughter, Kate, stepped outside with her coffee cup cradled in both hands. She paused at the sight of us, sensing the charged atmosphere immediately. "What's going on?" she asked softly, her eyes darting between us. "Dad thinks he can take on the homeowners association with nothing but gut feelings," he scoffed, crossing his arms defensively. Kate frowned slightly. I could see her mind working through our family dynamic, the unspoken rules we had all learned to navigate. "Maybe you should listen to him," she suggested quietly. "No offense," Daniel shot back, still agitated. "But Dad's instincts got us into this mess in the first place." A chill ran down my spine as I braced myself for what came next. "Mess?" I echoed incredulously. "This isn't about me. It's about uncovering their deceit." Daniel's expression hardened further. Stubbornness mixed with frustration painted across his features. "Or maybe it's just about your need to be right." His accusation lingered like a shadow between us. My heart sank deeper into my chest at that moment. Was it truly that simple? Was this fight more about honor than justice? All I wanted was to protect our home from dishonesty masquerading as community values. "I'm not trying to be right," I replied slowly, searching for the right words that might bridge this chasm between us. In an instant,
Kate stepped forward and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, a gesture meant to calm him, but also to anchor me in this moment of rising conflict. "Let's just hear him out," she urged gently. Daniel shook off her touch and turned away from me again, looking out at our street, where neighbors carried on with their lives oblivious to our turmoil. He muttered under his breath, words I couldn't quite catch, but felt heavy nonetheless. The silence stretched on until Kate broke it again with soft insistence. "If they're being dishonest about Section 4.2, then what?" Daniel interrupted sharply, his voice louder now, as if trying to drown out any notion of collaboration or understanding. I took a step closer to him, despite feeling my own defenses rise like walls around me. "We need to confront them. We gather evidence. We fight for our rights." He turned back toward me suddenly. His anger flared in his dark eyes like wildfire, licking up dry grasslands after a drought. "And what if you're wrong? What if you make things worse?" His question hung there like an unanswered prayer, a fragile truth wrapped in fear of failure or loss of respect among neighbors we'd known for years. "I'm not trying to be right," I said firmly, but quiet enough not to escalate further conflict, a measured response aimed at calming rather than igniting flames already smoldering between us. Kate remained silent now, caught between two conflicting worlds, but it was clear she supported my cause while fearing any fallout from Daniel's possible backlash. For a breathless moment, we stood there together, the three of us, each processing our roles within this family unit, caught up in an external battle mirroring deeper personal divides. Finally, breaking that charged silence again, I could almost sense resolve building within me. I declared, "Look, if we don't act now, when will we? Every day they get bolder." Daniel finally turned fully toward me. His face softened ever so slightly, as though considering my words anew, but doubt still clouded his gaze like fog rolling over hills before dawn breaks through. "I'll think about it," he relented reluctantly, while glancing away once more toward oblivion, beyond our porch railing, the world filled with distractions, pulling him away from this heated discussion grounded in honor and trust, and perhaps even love lost somewhere along life's winding path together. With that thought lingering heavily upon my shoulders, I heard Kate shifting beside me, her presence both soothing yet weighted down by unspoken concerns echoing through time like whispers carried by wind rustling leaves overhead, drawing nearer towards inevitable change, looming ever closer until something shifts, and soon. I felt the weight of the room shift as Helen stepped forward, her jaw tight set. The walls felt like they were closing in, echoing with unspoken tension. I could almost hear the clock ticking away our chances, each second a reminder that time wasn't on our side. "Bob," she said, her voice steady but low, "we can't let this go unnoticed. We need to gather evidence and make it public." Her eyes burned with determination, a fire igniting in the ashes of despair surrounding us. But before I could respond, the door swung open. It was Marcus, my assistant, his face pale and eyes wide. "They're coming for you," he blurted, breathless and frantic. "The press got wind of your case. It's all over social media." I glanced at Helen, reading the fear flickering across her features. This wasn't just another legal battle anymore. It was becoming a spectacle. Every word we spoke would be scrutinized under a harsh spotlight. Helen took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. "Then let them come," she declared fiercely. "We fight back with transparency and truth." A palpable charge filled the room as she took control, rallying us like soldiers preparing for battle. My heart raced. A rush of adrenaline surged through me. We were no longer passive observers. We were participants in our own story. Yet, somewhere in the pit of my stomach lurked an uncertainty, a lingering question. What if this exposure would only deepen the divide we sought to bridge?
The sound of rustling papers filled the air, a chaotic symphony underscored by the soft creaks of the old porch beneath our feet. As I watched the HOA ledger flip open in Kate's hands, I felt my pulse quicken. The weight of every decision made and every dishonor laid bare rested like a stone on my chest. "Did you read section 4.2? Kate asked, her eyes narrowing with skepticism. Her question sliced through the tension, hanging between us like a noose. I could sense the unease radiating from everyone gathered there. Sam shifting nervously, Daniel biting his lip, and Evan looking down as if searching for something he lost in the cracks of the porchwood. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows that danced around us, but it felt more like a prison than an invitation. I took a breath, trying to steady myself against the rising tide of pressure from all sides. It was clear that this meeting would not just be about property lines or shared expenses. It was about honor, the unspoken weight we carried as neighbors and community members. Evan suddenly spoke up, his voice quaking slightly. "If we're all in agreement about moving forward with changes to the bylaws," he paused, collecting his thoughts while glancing at me for support. It struck me then how fragile our collective trust had become. One misstep could unravel everything. "Changes?" I echoed back at him, feeling caution wrap around my words like barbed wire. "You think you're some sort of guardian for fairness here? All you do is stir up trouble." Her tone dripped with disdain. "I'm just trying to make sure we don't lose sight of what matters," I fired back, frustration bubbling beneath my skin like an overboiled pot ready to spill over. Megan chimed in then, her voice softer but laced with sharp clarity. "We need to bring this back to what really matters, the community." She glanced around at each of us, searching for understanding. We can't keep fighting amongst ourselves. In that moment, Helen entered, the one person no one expected would show up today. She stood at the edge of the porch, hesitant yet resolute, a small stack of HOA letters cradled in her arms like an offering. The atmosphere shifted instantly. She was both an anchor and a lightning rod. "I have something important to share," she said softly but firmly, stepping into our midst as if she were bringing light into our murky waters. "What is it?" Kate demanded impatiently. Helen hesitated before pulling out a letter marked with fresh ink, a letter detailing grievances filed by several residents against our leadership decisions over the last year. "I think we need to address these concerns directly," she insisted. That revelation hit hard, shaking loose some buried truths among us like leaves falling from autumn trees. Suddenly, everything seemed clearer, but also more perilous. Hidden grievances had taken root underneath our seemingly placid surface. As Helen spoke about accountability and transparency within our community, a call for unity that resonated deeply, I saw Kate's expression shift slightly from hostility to contemplation. "This could change everything," Daniel whispered, almost reverently, as if he were witnessing an unexpected dawn after a long night. I felt something resembling hope flicker within me. Perhaps we could rediscover common ground amid these fractures. But before I could fully embrace that thought or rally support around Helen's insights, Kate broke in again, her voice sharp as glass shards scraping against each other. "We can't just throw out everything we've worked on because of a few complaints. That's reckless." Her words cut through Helen's momentum like a dagger, aimed straight at our hearts. All progress stunted by fear of losing power rather than embracing collaboration. "Maybe," I replied slowly, choosing my words carefully amidst this tumultuous sea of conflict swirling around us. A tense silence fell upon us once more, the kind where breaths are held tightly and glances dart like frightened birds seeking refuge from looming shadows overhead. The ledger lay between us now, a not-so-innocent reminder of commitments made and trust broken, and in its pages was written not merely rules, but also our shared history, the good along with the bad, woven together like threads in an intricate tapestry. The courtroom door swung open, and in walked Helen, her expression a tightrope stretched to the limit. I could see the determination etched across her face, but beneath it lay a flicker of uncertainty. She clutched a stack of papers like they were lifelines, each sheet a potential anchor in this storm. "Bob," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around us. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle on my shoulders. The opposing counsel was already smirking at their advantage. It stung like salt on an open wound. As Helen laid out her strategy, something shifted in the atmosphere. The judge's gavel banged hard against wood, calling for order as murmurs trickled through the audience. I felt as if I was standing on quicksand, waiting for the ground to give way beneath my feet. "Let's counter their argument with our own evidence," she declared suddenly. It was as if she had pulled a rabbit out of a hat, a bold move that altered our trajectory. Her resolve became a beacon in that dimly lit room. The tension thickened. I could feel it constricting around my chest like a vice grip. With each passing moment, I sensed the balance of power teetering precariously in our favor. But just as I began to breathe easier, a figure rose from the back, someone unexpected. My heart raced as I recognized him. He had been absent for too long. What would he reveal?
The sound of the wind rustled through the trees, a low whisper that danced around me as I stood on the porch. The morning coffee in my hand had gone cold, forgotten in my pursuit of answers. I could feel the warmth of the sun beginning to break through, but it was overshadowed by the chill creeping into my bones. I glanced down at the fake invoice lying on the table, its presence heavy, like an anchor dragging me into murky waters. The numbers and words blurred together, taunting me with their deceit. I had stumbled upon it while rummaging through some old files. Something didn't sit right. It felt like a betrayal, a violation of trust wrapped in paper. Kate stepped out behind me, her footsteps soft yet purposeful. "What are you looking at?" she asked, peering over my shoulder. I turned the invoice toward her, watching her expression shift from curiosity to confusion. The air thickened between us as if we were suspended in time, both aware that this piece of paper held more than just numbers. "Does this look right to you?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with urgency. Kate frowned, leaning closer to examine it. Silence stretched out before us, as if reality was holding its breath. Suddenly, Sam's laughter broke through our tense moment like glass shattering underfoot. He approached with Daniel and Megan in tow, oblivious to the gravity of our discovery. They were caught up in their own world. Banter about last night's game filled the air like static electricity. I felt a surge of frustration. How could they be so carefree when something so serious loomed? "Hey, Bob! You read section 4.2? Sam called out, his tone lighthearted. My jaw tightened. Section 4.2 was a reminder of our ongoing battle with the HOA for fees that seemed unjustified. "Yeah," I replied tersely, "but we might have bigger problems." Megan's brows furrowed as she caught sight of the invoice in Kate's hands. "What's that?" she asked softly, stepping closer. "It's nothing," I said too quickly, regretting it instantly as their eyes narrowed with suspicion. The energy shifted again when Evan joined us on the porch. His face flushed from exertion as he jogged up from across the street. He took one look at us, at the invoice, and his expression changed dramatically. Suddenly, he was alert and attentive. "What's going on?" he asked sharply. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to reveal what we had found. This invoice, it doesn't seem legitimate. Evan's gaze locked onto mine. There was an understanding between us that transcended words, a shared history marked by honor and integrity. "Let me see," he demanded gently but firmly. As I handed him the document, Helen's voice echoed in my mind. Honesty is a fragile thing, like glass waiting to crack under pressure. He studied it closely, brow furrowing deeper as he absorbed every detail. "This isn't right," he muttered under his breath before looking up at me with determination etched across his features. "We need to confront them." Confrontation hung heavy in the air, like smoke from a fire that refused to die down completely. I could almost taste it on my tongue, a bitter tang that reminded me of past battles fought and won. Kate crossed her arms defensively. "But do we really know what we're dealing with? What if they retaliate?" Her concern sparked a flicker of doubt within me. After all, we were dealing with people who thrived on deception and manipulation, the very essence of dishonor itself. Evan opened his mouth to speak again when Daniel interjected loudly, breaking the tension like thunder cracking against a cloudless sky. "We can't let him get away with this." Daniel's conviction ignited something within me, an ember stirring back to life amidst uncertainty and fear. "I agree," I said finally, feeling a sense of resolve wash over me like warm sunlight breaking through storm clouds. In that moment, everything shifted. The power dynamic subtly altered as everyone turned towards Evan and me for direction now instead of resisting our instincts to act. But just then, a notification pinged on my phone, pulling my attention away from our conversation and back into reality. A message from a number I didn't recognize flashed ominously across the screen. "You're digging too deep." I froze for an instant as dread surged through me. Questions swirled around like leaves caught in a gust of wind. Who sent this? What did they know? And more importantly, how far would they go to protect their secrets? As silence enveloped us once more amidst rising tension and uncertainty, I couldn't shake off the numbness settling into my bones. A premonition clawing at my insides like an animal trapped beneath layers of ice waiting for spring thaw. Hallen's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "We can't let this go, Bob," she said, determination etched across her face. The urgency in her tone made my heart race. I had spent years fighting for justice, but now it felt like we were standing on the edge of a precipice. I nodded, clenching my fists. The papers scattered on the table were our lifeline, but they also felt like anchors dragging us deeper into despair. But what can we do? It's not just about us anymore. I glanced at the clock on the wall, its ticking echoing like a countdown to something inevitable. Just then, the door swung open with a creak that echoed through the room. In walked Marcus, a young intern who had been shadowing me for months. His eyes were wide and filled with a mix of fear and excitement. "Bob, Helen, you won't believe what I just found." The way he rushed in shifted the air around us. Hope was sparking anew. He held up a folder bursting with documents, fresh evidence that could turn the case in our favor. My heart thudded as I reached out to take it from him, feeling the weight of possibility in my hands. "We have to act fast," Helen declared decisively, scanning through the papers with fervor. Her resolve ignited something within me too. This was no longer just about survival, but about taking back control of our narrative. Suddenly, the phone rang loudly on my desk, cutting through our moment like shattering glass. I hesitated before answering, knowing that whatever news awaited could tilt our precarious balance yet again. The sound of the wind rustled through the trees, a low whisper that danced around me as I stood on the porch. The morning coffee in my hand had gone cold, forgotten in my pursuit of answers. I could feel the warmth of the sun beginning to break through, but it was overshadowed by the chill creeping into my bones. I glanced down at the fake invoice lying on the table, its presence heavy like an anchor dragging me into murky waters. The numbers and words blurred together, taunting me with their deceit. I had stumbled upon it while rummaging through some old files. Something didn't sit right. It felt like a betrayal, a violation of trust wrapped in paper. Kate stepped out behind me, her footsteps soft yet purposeful. "What are you looking at?" she asked, peering over my shoulder. I turned the invoice toward her, watching her expression shift from curiosity to confusion. The air thickened between us, as if we were suspended in time, both aware that this piece of paper held more than just numbers. "Does this look right to you?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with urgency. Kate frowned, leaning closer to examine it. Silence stretched out before us, as if reality was holding its breath. Suddenly, Sam's laughter broke through our tense moment like glass shattering underfoot. He approached with Daniel and Megan in tow, oblivious to the gravity of our discovery. They were caught up in their own world. Banter about last night's game filled the air like static electricity. I felt a surge of frustration. How could they be so carefree when something so serious loomed? "Hey, Bob, you read section 4.2? Sam called out, his tone lighthearted. My jaw tightened. Section 4.2 was a reminder of our ongoing battle with the HOA over fees that seemed unjustified. "Yeah," I replied tersely, "but we might have bigger problems." Megan's brows furrowed as she caught sight of the invoice in Kate's hands. "What's that?" she asked softly, stepping closer. "It's nothing," I said too quickly, regretting it instantly as their eyes narrowed with suspicion. The energy shifted again when Evan joined us on the porch, his face flushed from exertion as he jogged up from across the street. He took one look at us, at the invoice, and his expression changed dramatically. Suddenly, he was alert and attentive. "What's going on?" he asked sharply. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to reveal what we had found. "This invoice, it doesn't seem legitimate." Evan's gaze locked onto mine. There was an understanding between us that transcended words, a shared history marked by honor and integrity. "Let me see it," he demanded, gently but firmly. As I handed him the document, Helen's voice echoed in my mind. Honesty is a fragile thing, like glass waiting to crack under pressure. Evan studied it closely, brow furrowing deeper as he absorbed every detail. "This isn't right," he muttered under his breath before looking up at me with determination etched across his features. "We need to confront them." Confrontation hung heavy in the air, like smoke from a fire that refused to die down completely. I could almost taste it on my tongue, a bitter tang that reminded me of past battles fought and won. Kate crossed her arms defensively. "But do we really know what we're dealing with? What if they retaliate?" Her concern sparked a flicker of doubt within me. After all, we were dealing with people who thrived on deception and manipulation, the very essence of dishonor itself. Evan opened his mouth to speak again when Daniel interjected loudly, breaking the tension like thunder cracking against a cloudless sky. "We can't let them get away with this." Daniel's conviction ignited something within me, an ember stirring back to life amidst uncertainty and fear. "I agree," I said finally, feeling a sense of resolve wash over me like warm sunlight breaking through storm clouds. In that moment, everything shifted. The power dynamic subtly altered as everyone turned towards Evan and me for direction now, instead of resisting our instincts to act. But just then, a notification pinged on my phone, pulling my attention away from our conversation and back into reality. A message from a number I didn't recognize flashed ominously across the screen. "You're digging too deep." I froze for an instant as dread surged through me. Questions swirled around like leaves caught in a gust of wind. Who sent this? What did they know? And more importantly, how far would they go to protect their secrets? As silence enveloped us once more amidst rising tension and uncertainty, I couldn't shake off the numbness settling into my bones. a premonition clawing at my insides like an animal trapped beneath layers of ice waiting for spring thaw. Helen's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "We can't let this go, Bob," she said, determination etched across her face. The urgency in her tone made my heart race. I had spent years fighting for justice, but now it felt like we were standing on the edge of a precipice. I nodded, clenching my fists. The papers scattered on the table were our lifeline, but they also felt like anchors, dragging us deeper into despair. But what can we do? It's not just about us anymore. I glanced at the clock on the wall, its ticking echoing like a countdown to something inevitable. Just then, the door swung open with a creak that echoed through the room. In walked Marcus, a young intern who had been shadowing me for months. His eyes were wide and filled with a mix of fear and excitement. "Bob, Helen, you won't believe what I just found." The way he rushed in shifted the air around us. Hope was sparking anew. He held up a folder bursting with documents, fresh evidence that could turn the case in our favor. My heart thudded as I reached out to take it from him, feeling the weight of possibility in my hands. "We have to act fast," Helen declared decisively, scanning through the papers with fervor. Her resolution ignited something within me, too. This was no longer just about survival, but about taking back control of our narrative. Suddenly, the phone rang loudly on my desk, cutting through our moment like shattering glass. I hesitated before answering, knowing that whatever news awaited could tilt our precarious balance yet again.
The moment I stepped out onto the porch, the world felt heavy. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath my feet, echoing the tension rising in the air. Each sound around me seemed amplified. The distant chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves, whispering secrets to one another. Kate was already there, her arms crossed tightly, as if she could shield herself from the storm brewing between us. I could sense it, a palpable shift in atmosphere. There were no words exchanged as I joined her. We both knew that silence was just a prelude to an inevitable confrontation. "Did you read section 4.2? Kate's voice broke through the thick air, sharp and accusatory. It was a question loaded with implication, one that hung like a weight over us both. My fingers instinctively brushed against my coffee cup, seeking warmth in its familiar embrace. But all I felt was the chill creeping back into my bones. "I did," I replied evenly, though my heart raced beneath my calm exterior. It wasn't just about the letter, it never was, but about what lay hidden beneath our grievances. Just then, Sam appeared from around the corner, his brow furrowed with concern. "What's going on here?" He glanced between us, a bridge trying to connect two islands adrift in a sea of unresolved issues. "It's nothing," Kate snapped back, her gaze unwavering. But we both knew it was anything but nothing. It was honor at stake, the very fabric of our relationships fraying at the edges. As tension thickened like smoke around us, Daniel came into view, his presence adding fuel to the fire. "We need to talk," he said bluntly, stepping closer without invitation. His eyes flickered between me and Kate, as if gauging which side would yield first. "Talk? About what?" I shot back defensively, while shifting my weight from one foot to another, trying to dissipate some of my unease. "About how we're being watched?" The doorbell cam had become an unwelcome player in our game, an ever-present reminder that our conversations might not remain private for long. Megan joined us next, her face pale with anxiety as she took in the scene before her. "Guys, this isn't helping." She gestured toward Daniel and then toward Kate and me, as if attempting to physically separate our swirling emotions. "Maybe it is time we stop pretending everything's fine," Evan chimed in finally, breaking his silence as he leaned against the porch railing like he was bracing for impact. His voice carried a weight that demanded attention. This wasn't just about honor anymore, it became about truth itself.
My mind raced through possible outcomes and consequences as each word hung heavily between us like dark clouds threatening rain. What if I spoke up now? What if I laid bare everything? But fear held me captive. Fear of losing them all over something that should have remained buried. In that moment of uncertainty, I made my decision. It wasn't just about me anymore. It concerned everyone standing here together on this porch under a shared roof of unspoken truths. "Listen," I began, slowly and deliberately, feeling every heartbeat thrum inside me like a war drum preparing for battle. "We've been dancing around each other too long." As I spoke those words aloud, my metaphorical anchor, I saw Kate's expression shift slightly. She leaned forward as if pulled by some unseen force drawing us closer together rather than further apart. What followed shocked even me. "I'm willing to confront what we've been avoiding." The air crackled with anticipation. An electric charge surged through this gathering storm of emotions. Each pair of eyes turned toward me, some wide with surprise while others narrowed skeptically, yet they were all focused on what would come next. Kate inhaled sharply as she processed my declaration, a mixture of relief and dread flickering across her features like shadows dancing in candlelight. A soft sigh escaped her lips moments later. But before any more words could escape into that charged silence around us, Evan interjected once again with urgency etched across his face. "Are you sure about this? We might lose everything." His voice echoed within me like thunder rolling through valleys, the kind that rattles windows and sends shivers down spines. But instead of retreating into doubt again, I stood firm amidst their uncertainty, my resolve solidifying like concrete setting hard under pressure. Then there was Daniel's skeptical smirk breaking through layers of tension, the kind that feels almost inviting, yet carries an edge sharper than glass, and I couldn't help but wonder where he stood amidst this whirlwind we'd created together. As silence enveloped us once more following Evan's question, I could feel its weight pressing down on each person present. We remained suspended on this precipice between revelation and concealment, where honor clashed fiercely against fear. Would revealing everything ultimately bring us peace, or unravel what little bond was left? My heart raced anew at the thought. It felt like standing atop an unfinished bridge stretching across dark waters below, one step forward risking everything while holding tightly onto fragile connections tethered by invisible threads woven over years past. But one thing lingered unspoken within these tense moments. What would happen after we opened Pandora's box? Would honesty prove liberating or imprisoning? And so we stood there, a knot tightened among friends turned strangers again, as shadows danced upon our faces from flickering lights nearby, illuminating only parts of who we truly were, underneath layers built up over time, and yet still painfully exposing what lay ahead when all secrets are finally unleashed into daylight beyond those porch steps, leading away from familiarity towards uncertain futures waiting just beyond sight.
The morning air felt thick, almost oppressive, as I leaned against the porch railing. The distant chirping of birds was drowned out by the thrum of my own thoughts. Evan had been quiet lately, a storm brewing behind his eyes that I couldn't quite decipher. Today, though, he seemed different, charged somehow. I sipped my coffee, the warmth spreading through my hands, grounding me. Then came the sound of footsteps. Evan appeared at the door, clutching an old film roll like it was a fragile artifact from another time. The way he held it close to his chest made me uneasy. It was as if he carried a secret wrapped in that canister. "What did you find?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated for a moment, his brow furrowing as he processed his words. "I found this photo in Dad's stuff," he said slowly, eyes darting toward the ground before meeting mine again. "I think we need to talk."
I felt a knot twist in my stomach. Something heavy hung between us. That film roll could unravel everything we thought we knew about our family's past and what had been left unsaid. Evan stepped closer, lowering his voice. It's not just any picture. It's one of Mom and someone else. His gaze shifted toward the old tree in our front yard that had witnessed countless family moments, both joyful and painful. Who? I pressed, already dreading the answer. He opened the film canister with trembling fingers and pulled out the faded photo within. My breath hitched as I saw her face, smiling back at me, but beside her stood a stranger with familiar features, a man who looked hauntingly like Gabe. There it was, the sharp, inciting moment that pierced through my defenses. The realization crashed over me like ice water. All these years spent in denial were hanging by a thread now. I didn't want to believe it, Evan muttered, more to himself than to me. I reached for the photograph instinctively, but paused mid-motion when I saw the pain etched on his face. What was this revelation doing to him? To us? Gabe had always been a shadowy figure in our family history. Stories of him were murky at best. Yet here he was, in vivid color alongside Helen. My Helen, grinning as if they shared a world that didn't include me or Evan. What does this mean? I asked quietly. It means there are truths buried deeper than we thought, he replied sharply, anger flashing across his features for just a moment before retreating into confusion. As if summoned by our conversation's weighty undertones, Kate emerged from inside the house, with Daniel trailing closely behind her. Their laughter floated into our tense atmosphere like an unwelcome breeze. They paused when they noticed Evan's somber expression and then exchanged glances filled with concern. "What's going on?" Kate asked lightly, but with an edge of genuine curiosity. Evan turned slightly away from them and focused on me again, determination flickering in his eyes like candlelight fighting against wind. "We have to confront this," he stated firmly. My instincts kicked in. Secrets were dangerous creatures meant to be handled delicately or risk being swallowed whole by their consequences. But how could I hold him back? This was his journey too. "Okay," I said slowly, weighing each word as if they might tip the scales further toward chaos or clarity. Kate stepped closer, then peered at the photograph over Evan's shoulder, as if she could read its story through mere observation alone. A lingering silence enveloped us all, until Daniel finally broke it with an awkward cough. "What is that?" he exclaimed suddenly, pointing at the photo with wide-open eyes filled with disbelief. Evan looked up sharply. Now we would have to navigate this tangled web together or risk being ensnared individually. Kate frowned, but nodded slightly toward Evan, encouraging him without saying a word. A silent pact forged in family loyalty, even amid turmoil. The tension shifted subtly as Evan began explaining how he'd stumbled upon that ancient film roll tucked away in Dad's attic after searching for something innocuous, a personal touchstone for nostalgia that instead bore witness to hidden truths too long buried beneath layers of memory and silence. Every detail mattered now. Where Mom had been when this picture was taken, why Gabe had remained such an elusive specter throughout our lives. I could almost feel time folding over itself around those questions while lingering light danced across our faces under mottled shadows, cast by nearby trees swaying gently above us, like guardians unsure whether to intervene or observe. As Evan spoke, another layer peeled back, revealing unspoken grievances and regrets among us, all festering wounds needing attention rather than avoidance. But before any more could unfold, "Wait!" Kate interjected suddenly, her tone urgent yet cautious. "If your dad kept this hidden, what else is there?" Her question hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder that every revelation might lead us further down a path neither of us could anticipate fully, yet still felt compelled to explore despite its daunting nature. The weight of possibilities pressed down on us like an avalanche ready to tumble forth as we stood on this precipice of truth and consequence together, united yet fragile. Each heartbeat echoing louder than any word spoken between us as we braced ourselves for whatever lay ahead beneath layers of honor and dishonor,
lurking just beyond reach, like shadows waiting patiently for daylight's return.